Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vanessa Grossel, Advancement Manager, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today as we celebrate Innovation Month at the Council of State Governments. This is our final Innovation Classroom of the series, and we hope you will find value in today's program and have enjoyed tuning in each Monday in May to these virtual innovation classrooms on a broad range of topics from healthcare to technology. Today's innovation classroom, Retirement Security and the Future of Work, is brought to you by the National Public Pension Coalition. And now I have a few reminders before we begin. This session is being recorded, and at the conclusion, it will be posted on the CSG website. We encourage audience members to type any questions that arise at any point during the presentation into either the Q&A or the chat areas at the bottom of your screen, and we will reserve time at the end to address them following the presentations. But for now, why don't you go ahead and tell us in the chat which state you are tuning in from today. And now I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. Bridget Early, Executive Director of the National Public Pension Coalition, and Dan Doonan, Executive Director of the National Institute on Retirement Security. Thank you both for participating with us today, and I now turn this program over to you.
Thank you, Vanessa, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, CSG team, everyone at CSG for helping us facilitate this innovation classroom and having us today. Also, thank you to everybody joining us. It's good to see some friendly names, I should say, in the chat. And also thank you to Dan, my co-panelist today, for joining us, and who graciously will be taking up a lot of the slack while I recover from COVID. So I'm going to keep my remarks brief, but my contact information is available at the end of the slide, and also feel free, please, to reach out to Vanessa and CSG for any additional information you may need from me that I may not be able to get to in today's presentation. And so I'm going to share my screen so you can see my brief slides here. And so we named this panel the Retirement Security and the Future of Work, in large part because we've seen a lot of data that supports how defined benefit pension plans help retain and recruit some of the finest workers in our public workforce. And in return, it provides some of the most secure retirement for those that teach our children, keep our healthcare systems running, and provide other public safety and other crucial public services. And so I do want to share this next visual with you of, public pensions are earned. There is oftentimes a misconception that this is a free benefit, or something in which that employees are not maybe necessarily contributing to, and that's not necessarily the case. Public employees continue to pay into their pensions each and every session, or each and every paycheck. And while you may see headlines of some of your higher paying public officials taking home significant pensions, it's really important to remember that within public service, you're also supporting the retirement security of those even doing your custodial work and anything across the board. Some pension facts, and I'm not going to read through these, but one part that I know that some people like to hear about, though, is that our public pension systems are mostly funded through, receive most of their funding through investment earnings. And so the work, and Dan is going to be able to explain this a bit better as to how that mechanism works, but it really does help generate a really significant benefit that attracts and retains your workforce, whether these are, your new employees coming into the public workforce is, especially I think we think a lot about those in education, newly graduates coming in, starting their career as teachers, all the way up to maybe your mid to senior level private sector workers looking to make a change. And so because of that pooled investment, they're able to really maximize those dollars to drive up how they're building those funds. Another key point too, at the end, is how much pension funds generate in revenue for your state and local governments. And our friends at the National Conference on Public Employee Retirement Systems has generated a report over the years called Unintended Consequences, where they estimate that $341 billion is generated each year in state and local revenue. Another part to just put into context is the amount of money that is spent on state and local governments when it comes to pension spending versus the rest of expenditures that you all see come across your desk each and every year. And so while we understand, especially on our end, how these numbers seem very big, at the end of the day, your spending on normal cost is only about 5% of your state or local budget. And put into comparison, only generates a small fraction of what state and local governments spend their money on. And so briefly, and something that I would be happy to discuss more with you, are just a brief point on the experiences of those who have pursued the thoughts of closing defined benefit plans and switching to defined contribution plans. We've seen two consequences or experiences within the workforce. One, we've seen a higher rate of turnover, and this has really been across the board, whether you're talking about state systems or even municipalities, where public employees will go find where the better benefits lay in order to while they're continuing to pursue their profession. And because of that, that really turns into not just your loss of experience, your loss of institutional knowledge, and what that does to the services those public agencies provide, but it also increases cost on the training side as well. One example is we've seen townships where their system closed to public safety officers, and over time, while the system remained closed, new members would come in, get hired, would train with that town's public with their law enforcement agency. And then once they had their training under their belt, were able to take their experience and go to a surrounding town, resulting in about $20 million in training costs for that town. That I think was not obviously the intended, was another unintended consequence of closing their system. And so apologies, I feel like I know I threw a lot, but I wanted to get through just some really key facts about why we think pensions really help with how the future of work is shaking out, how our public services continue to remain, even through unprecedented times, a resilient force in our communities, and how do we maintain those key essential services while attracting the highest quality candidates. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dan to talk a lot about the data that his organization has done, looking at additional experiences within retirement systems across the country. So thank you, Dan.
All right. Thank you, Bridget. You're a trooper to be with us here today. Thank you, Vanessa, and the Council and State Governments. I'm going to share my screen here and hopefully explain a little bit about what we do at NERS. So we are, can you see that, Vanessa? Okay, great. So we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization, sort of a think tank on retirement. And we do a lot of work on public retirement systems, public pensions, but we also do broader work in how people are doing preparing for retirement. So today I'm going to have some key takeaways, some high-level pieces from various different research projects we've done, and pull these different ideas together at the end, hopefully, for you. We'll start with some opinion work. You know, we do opinion research on what Americans think about retirement, as well as what public employees think about some issues on retirement. I'll talk a little more in detail about the implications of closing a DB plan, the economic impact of pension dollars, and then finally, the efficiency of delivering benefits through defined benefit, defined contribution, as well as how that's changed. And I'd like to talk a little bit, hopefully I have time, about what changes might be coming up as well. So I'm going to start out. I pulled some opinion data from millennials. How do millennials view some different aspects of retirement? In figure 6 there, you'll see millennials are the most pessimistic generation when it comes to them being able to achieve a financially secure retirement. And interestingly enough, when you ask a more systemic question like, is our retirement system not working? You see the older generations have higher response rate. Millennials also agree with that, but when it comes to their personal experience, they seem more fearful, more concerned about their own retirement security. So that's an interesting little twist that we see between the different generations. And then on figure 19, there's a broad agreement across the generations that pensions provide better retirement security. I mean, by definition, this is a paycheck for life. Every month you get your check, so you don't run out. So I think it's incredibly user-friendly, and it's clearly easier to manage than managing your own money and thinking about how long you'll live and all of that. So on the next slide, the pandemic has also had an impact on millennials. So when you look, when we did the opinion research, we asked people about different aspects. Have you decreased your retirement savings, spent emergency savings, or withdrawn from your retirement? And you can see all those are higher for millennials than the other generations. And I think some of this is sort of natural. The younger workers aren't as established, more likely to become detached during, an economic, in addition to the healthcare pandemic, there's a lot of economic implications to COVID-19. And the younger generations tended to get hit and impacted by those more. And, if you think about retirement, you want people putting resources away at a young age, so there's time for it to grow. So this is what we see as a significant setback for millennials in retirement. The next couple pieces of information are specifically the views of millennial state and local government employees. So 97% of millennials working in state and local government have a favorable view of pensions. And you can see the dark green there, the 52 is very favorable. The lighter green is somewhat favorable. And then for very unfavorable is actually the 0.5% there. So I think there's a lot of people in state and local government employment that understand the value of pensions. And like other generations, millennials say that this is one of the reasons that they took their job in the public sector in the first place, with 36% of millennials strongly agreeing and another 37 somewhat agreeing. So this is taking the job. And then on the next slide, we can see, is this a reason to stay in your job? And the numbers go up a little bit. And I think that indicates some people might have taken the job and then learned a little bit more about their benefits and started to value them more. And I will say in general, if you're an employer and you're providing something of value, I think it's really good to take credit and tell your employees this is something important to you, so that you get credit for it because you are doing that work. But 46% of millennials, and we often think of younger workers not thinking about retirement until they're knocking on the door to retire, but 46% strongly agree this is a reason to stay in their job. And here we have, are pensions an effective way to retain state and local government employees? And again, this is millennials. 92% agree that this is an effective way for employers to retain public employees. And we do see in the public sector, the median tenure of workers is about twice as long as the public sector, which has moved away from pensions. So I think that culture of career employment has stuck around much better on the public sector side. And 71% of millennials also say they'd be more likely to leave if their pension was cut. I think, see a similar thing if you ask about care, if you're cutting benefits, people are going to be upset about that. But 34% strongly agree amongst millennials there. And then finally, on this front, 92% of millennial state and local workers believe pensions incentivize a long public service career. And this is really the original purpose of offering pensions for employers. When we go back to when pensions started, we gave a tax deduction. Employers designed it in a way that they wanted this to be valuable and as far as retaining workers. Their economies changed a great bit, but the incentives provided by a pension really have remained. Now, I'm going to move on to the next section and talk a little bit about the implications of closing a pension plan. Michigan SERS made a decision to close their plan. I think it was 1995, and it went into effect the next year. But this is the cash flow of their plan now, where benefits coming out of the plan on the right there are 12% of assets. Now, the contributions that are going in to fund the plan over time is 5% of assets. So this means if the investment returns hit at 7%, which is roughly where their assumption is, then they're essentially breaking even year over year. And that would maintain, the asset base from one year to the next to pay benefits in the future. But if you think about what happens between plans with a large negative cash flow or one that maybe is positive or slightly negative, if you have a year where the value of investments drops a lot, you actually have to start selling. You don't have that 7% coming in. So you have to start selling your investments to pay benefits. And this means you're selling it while the prices are low, right? So if the returns are coming in and supporting benefits with the growth of assets, it's not really a bad situation at this point. But as plans, have fewer actives coming in, paying in, having employers pay in on their behalf, their plans mature, more retirees, less workers in the system, and you have a larger and larger negative cash flow over time. Now, a lot of public systems have a negative cash flow, but this is a bit of an outlier as far as how large the negative cash flow is, being essentially the 12% benefit payments minus the 5% contribution base. And that's when you hear negative cash flow, that's usually what we're looking at is those two pieces. But I did want to throw the investment returns as well, because essentially Michigan's SERS plan is relying on those investments right now. If you're a plan with a positive cash flow and the investment markets tank for a year or two, if you're not actually selling investments, it's really just a chance to buy investments at a cheaper price. But if you are liquidating investments, selling them off, when the markets rebound, you don't get that because you sold those investments. And I think that's important. And this is actually an illustration that was done at the 2020 Enrolled Actuaries meeting, I did a presentation with Bonnie Wurst of GRS Consulting, and she ran some numbers on this front with projected net cash flow in an open versus closed plan. This is the same plan, but whether or not you close it. And what you see is, the red line is the closed plan. Over time, you're going to have fewer coming into the system, fewer paying in. So you just have that. It's a natural process of closing a plan, right? You're paying down, spending down your benefits. Now, what does this mean as far as making decisions about managing your plan? Well, eventually, the plan's going to look much more like a retiree than a worker. If you think of a pension system with dollars coming in and out as being maybe investing more like a 40-year-old, when your plan is liquidating and selling off assets, you need to really think about it more in terms of it's more in the spend down phase like a retiree. And what do we tell retirees to do to reduce risk? We tell them to invest more conservatively. So that's one implication in a closed plan is eventually, it may not be the day you close your plan, it may be 10, 15 years later. But at some point, you're probably going to be considering, should we invest money differently? That impacts your returns and the cost of the plan overall. So again, this is from Bonnie's slide. If you in 2021, we're assuming 7.5% return, but when you close your plan, you're going to put the money in bonds. This is a plan with $16 billion in liabilities that nearly doubles your costs by lowering future returns, right? As Bridget mentioned, pensions, a lot of the money coming into pensions to support the cost of the benefits come from investment returns. So in this hypothetical plan, the present value of benefits is 16 billion, and future employees will put in 1.4 billion, and the assets were 12.5, and that's over on the right box. So, what you're looking at with these different iterations, and I'll go to the bolded one in 2038. If you're assuming 7.5, what the 2038 means, maybe 17 years later, you make a choice to invest differently because your portfolio is more risky with the same investments if you have a shorter time frame, if you're spending down, right? So a portfolio of 60% stocks, not risky if you're going to hold it for 50 years, but if you need it in 5 years, there's actually more risk inherent just because of the timing. And that's the basic reason we tell retirees to invest differently than young people. So if in 2038, you move your investments to something you expect a 4% return, the closure cost would actually be about $2 billion in additional costs. Now, I've seen different studies where systems have looked at what are the cost implications of closing the plan. I don't usually see it laid out this thoroughly, so I thought it would be interesting for you to see that way as well. And what you see is if you wait longer or you make a less dramatic move to more conservative investments, the cost declines, but it also means you're carrying more risk, right? You're carrying those aggressive investments deeper into the negative cash flow years. So that's sort of the inherent trade-off with managing money in a closed system. Over time, if you are paying out 7% more than is coming in, a 2-year market crash, you're going to be selling a lot of investments and the recovery won't look like other plans. So again, this borrowed from Bonnie's, a few comments on this. If the service is closed to new hires, stakeholders need to think about changing the allocation and when they might do that and what that might look like. I think sometimes plans are closed and you may not know what the future is going to look like until people start coming in with the new valuation reports. I think it's important to understand and ask questions about those kinds of plans and how things will be managed. The asset allocation very likely to be changed. And I will say one of the considerations here, if you're talking about a very small plan in a big state with a lot of money, that may not be as important. But in Alaska, they have 2 plans, both closed. It's a large plan relative to the size of their economy and their budget. So the risk is greater if you think about it in terms of how relevant are the liabilities of the plan to the plan sponsor itself. That's another factor to think about. So the chart 7, the range from 518 to 13 billion, that's the closing cost. That's the last chart we just looked at. And then the median value on chart 7 was that bolded row that I walked through. So, Michigan SERS is one of the plans that closed. This plan is actually only for state employees. It's not all public sector workers in Michigan. So again, some of the plans remained open. This would probably be maybe about 1 in 5 public workers in Michigan. So it's not everyone like in the Alaska situation, which is important. But this plan was actually closed in 96. It was overfunded at the time. And I'm sure people there felt like they were done with the plan. It was fully funded, it was closed. So, nothing more to do there. But in reality, the contributions, the unfunded liabilities, both went up and the funding ratio has fallen since. I think it's hard to put real firm numbers to, but I think the experiences in these volatile years are going to look different within a plan with a high negative cash flow and one that's more balanced. So I'm going to jump to the next research piece that I wanted to cover today and look a little bit about the economic impact of the pension dollars that are paid out. So in 2018, there were $578 billion in DB pensions, and this is public and private, paid to 24.8 million retirees. And that 578 billion translates into 1.3 trillion in economic output nationwide. It supports 6.9 million jobs and 394 billion in labor income. The value add, the increase in GDP, is 704 billion and about 191 billion back to federal, state, and local taxes. So we know younger workers are less likely to be offered a pension in the workplace today than they were a generation ago. The pensions they have very long lifespan, and the dollars coming out of pensions are still very relevant in an economic sense when you look at the scope of, how many retirees are being supported by pensions today. Now, when we do this study and we look at the economic impacts, the basic thing here, we're looking at the benefit channel, the dollars being paid out. We don't attempt to put numbers to the investment channel. So, when you see state plans managing a lot of money, this study does not include any increase in economic activity from those investments. It's just the benefits. And how does that work? Well, this is sort of our example we use in the report. Money goes to a retired firefighter. Maybe they need a new lawnmower, they go to buy that. The store sells a lawnmower. Some of that money goes into payroll, resupplying the lawnmower. And then eventually, if you have enough people spending these dollars, that has a downstream impact where employers can hire more people, sell more goods and that sort of thing. So it has a ripple impact, just like any other economic program where money is going out into the communities. But in this case, it tends to go to retirees with a fairly modest standard of living. So in this study, we note their economic multiplier. So for every pension dollar paid out as benefits, there's a $2.19 impact on the economy. And that's how we go from the 579 billion in payments to the 1.3 trillion in economic output. But if you look at how good a deal this is for taxpayers, a dollar in equals $8.80 coming out. And the reason for this is most of those pension dollars are not coming from taxpayers. In fact, it's about a quarter. So employees pay in, the employer pays in, and then because it's a pre-funded program, and there's not a lot of public programs that I can think of, or any, frankly, where we try to be 100% pre-funded for all future expenses. But that's the standard that we have with public pensions. And what it means is all those investment returns accrue over time and really support the cost of the benefits themselves. So from a taxpayer perspective, the $1 in gets you the $8.80 of output. And here I have this broken down a little bit further for you. So when you look at state and local pensions, that's the first column. It supports about 3.7 million jobs. And then the federal pensions are a little bit less. There's fewer people in the federal pension system, and the private pensions all adding up to 6.9 million jobs that are supported by the economic activity created by pension benefits. And another thing to think about is what industries really benefit from this. And it's another thing that M-Plan, the model we use for this, is able to tell us. So real estate, restaurants, healthcare facilities, nursing, wholesale, retail, trade. These are the industries who receive the biggest job impacts from pensions, state and local pensions. And again, we have them broken out across the screen there. So I'm going to get to my last topic I wanted to cover here and spend a little bit more time with this one before leaving some time for questions. So the study we've done, NERS has done in the past. I was here this time for Better Bang for the Buck 3.0, and we looked at some new things, some different ideas and concepts in this one that I wanted to share with you. But essentially what we do in Better Bang for the Buck is we look at providing a certain level of retirement benefits, and then we look at the cost under different types of retirement systems. So how much does it cost as a share of payroll to provide a certain level of retirement security through different types, an apples to apples comparison of DB and DC plans, but also, like what we call an ideal DC, where, your investments are done very, very well and in an ideal way. And really, this has been a fairly consistent finding. There's 3 reasons why pensions offer more benefits per dollar going in compared to defined contribution plans. First, we pool longevity risks. What does that mean? If you have 1,000 retirees, some, say everybody retires at 62, some will live to 64, some will live to 104. In an individual-based system, you need to figure out how long you'll live, manage your money until then. But in a pooled system, all the money is going towards everybody. So those who live longer actually will receive more value out of the plan than those who live a shorter period of time. But it also means all the dollars in the plan are going towards retirement benefits. So if you pass away a year after you retire and you were spending down, most of your retirement assets are probably not going to go towards retirement itself, right? It ends up going to estates or your kids or something. So pooling longevity, it's the same concept as insurance. We don't all save to replace our house in case of a fire. We all pay in. The people that need the insurance get it. It's the same basic idea there in pooling longevity. The second reason is that pensions are what we call ageless, meaning they can maintain an optimal portfolio over time. If people are coming into the plan and the plan cash flow stays at a reasonable level where it's not spending down, you can keep investing and get through those ups and downs in the markets and not essentially move to more of a bond-based portfolio. And if you think about, again, a retiree on their own, we would not want them invested too aggressively unless they have a lot of extra money that they can afford to lose, I guess. But yeah, we advise people to invest more conservatively. That has an implication on cost and efficiency of a retirement system, having to dial back how you invest that much. And then the third reason is achieving higher investment returns. We've seen DB plans out-earn DC plans in the past due to professional management and lower fees. I will say, since the first NERS study on this, and we talk about it in the paper, DC fees have come down significantly. which is really good news for people in 401k type plans. There's been a lot of lawsuits over the years. And, I think as a part of that, everybody became more conscious of the fees that individuals are paying in the plans. So the fee part of this is much lower during the working years, but post-retirement, we still culturally expect someone to retire, take their money out of a DC plan with fiduciary protections, and sort of go it alone and figure out how to manage their money on their own. And as you'll see, that's going to be a big part of the story on this report. So we do look at a basic DB plan. What are the costs of delivering the benefits in a DB plan? An ideal DC plan. So here we have a target date fund asset allocation and glide path. That means over your working career, your investments are going to automatically change like they're in a lifetime fund, so that as you approach retirement, you will be taking on less risk. And, years ago, we used to default people into, something really safe so that employers would not be sued if you were defaulted into equities and you lost money. The industries have really moved along, and I think the policies have moved along to allow industry to default people into more appropriate investment mixes. So a lot of plans now can default you into a target date fund, and your asset allocation, if you don't make any decision, will be based more on your age, like what's appropriate for someone my age. And I think that's another improvement in the 401k world as well. But we assume same fees for the ideal DC plan and no behavioral drag. And this has to do with how people invest on their own without professional management. And then the third type of plan is individually directed DC plan. Again, target date fund. We assume that people are in what I would say is more of an ideal investment situation with the target date fund, but industry average fees and then behavioral drag, and particularly post-retirement once you leave that fiduciary plan in your workplace. So in the study, we actually look at two career paths. We hadn't done that in the past, working from age 30 or age 45 and retiring at age 62. Today, I'm going to focus on the results for the first, but I will note that the results for the mid-career hire looked very much the same in terms of the economic efficiency of the different types of plans. The biggest difference is they all get more expensive. If you start at a later date and you want to hit a target, it gets more expensive. So that's one thing I would note there, because I didn't anticipate having time to do a lot. The full report here today. So we also looked at two investment return environments. We looked at long-term investment expectations, including and excluding the next 10 years. And why that's important is, as we were doing this report, the markets had gone up and up through the pandemic. I'll never be able to explain that, but what it means is, as equity prices go up, people expect the next couple of years returns to be a little bit lower. Essentially, you're going to give back some of that. So what we saw in capital markets expectations was a little bit of pessimism over the first 10 years, and then sort of what we would consider to be more normal in the years after. Again, I'm not going to cover the low return scenario today, but I would note again, the efficiency of different plans were again pretty similar in the lower return environment. But again, all plans get more expensive. So we know if you lower the discount rate on a pension, that means more dollars to put the same money away, right? We expect lower returns. It's the same exact thing within a savings-based plan, like a 401k or an IRA. If future returns are going to be lower, you need to put more money in over time to reach that target. The math, it all works really fundamentally the same there. So for this study, we take a population of 1,000 female teachers who start at age 30, final salary 60,000. We define the target retirement to be 2,700 a month at age 62. And then we calculate what does it cost to get there under the different plans. So I think that's the short story. And this is the results for our default scenario. essentially 16.5% of pay in the DB plan. And then you can see the layers. I went over the 3 reasons why DB plans deliver more bang for the buck. The first is the longevity pooling. If you don't have longevity pooling, it adds another 2.3% of pay to the cost of benefits. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The less balanced portfolios adds another 3.8% of pay to get there. And again, this is lesser returns mean higher cost to hit the same target. And then finally, lower returns and higher fees adds quite a bit there. In total, delivering the same benefit by a DB pension versus an individually directed DC plan costs about half as much, or 49% savings. So I did mention I wanted to talk a little bit more about the pooling of mortality risk, because I think this is maybe a more foreign concept. This is the benefit, the green bars are the benefits you would expect to pay out in a defined benefit plan for this sample population of 1,000 female teachers. So the benefits go up in the early years as there's a COLA incorporated into the plan, and then they drop off as more people pass away, so total benefit dollars go down. Now at age 92, now teachers are known to live a bit longer. They have a mortality table, and we're talking about a teacher that we're retiring 32 years from today. So we have built into this some future mortality improvement. But the median teacher would live to about 92. Now, if you assume an individual is spending down, they're not planning for the median experience, but the 75th percentile, you would be looking at about age 97. And in the report, we actually have a chart that shows what percentage of people are alive at each age. So you can look at that if you're more interested in the mortality side of this. But the point being, if you don't plan for the average mortality, you need more dollars to carry to later years. And in the report, in trying to be really, I'd say, fair to the DC plan, we assume people will adjust their spend down if they reach later ages. And then another implication of this unpooled mortality risk is, as I mentioned, some of these retirement dollars that you're saving in DC plans are not going to create retirement income, right? So some portion of people are going to pass away at younger ages with large balances. Some people are going to live very long. In our model, the yellow part of this curve, and this is essentially the DC money cash flow curve, 15% of the money that is saved will actually not go towards producing retirement income. They're going to go to estates. So you can see, the benefits again go up with inflation and down as mortality has a bigger impact on income needs. And then there's a little jump right around age 83 here. And this is when we assume people at 83 who are still alive are going to say, you know what, I'm going to spend a little less so I don't run out. And that's why the dollars last to 100 and 102 and don't dry up at age 97. So if there was no adjustment like that, everybody living past age 97 would essentially have run out of money. So, ideally, we're hoping people get spend down right. In truth, it's incredibly complicated to get right. But we wanted to sort of have an ideal to compare against here. Now, one of the new features of this report this year, the 3.0 version, is we broke out the inefficiencies for the individually directed DC plan by post and pre-retirement. And in the baseline scenario, if you remember, I said it's 49% less expensive. Only 9 of that 49 occurs during the working years. So what we see here is the problem. I think DC plans have done a better job during the working years, getting fees lower, being able to invest in lifetime funds. We're not seeing as much. There are some problems out there, but it's much more common for DC plans to look pretty reasonable as far as how people are investing, what the fees are. Now, post-retirement, This is taking someone who's 62 or 65 and say they take their money and they have to go find someone to help them manage it. And seniors are quite vulnerable to bad advice or maybe people doing sales that are incentivized to sell high product fees and things like that. But it's also, how do I manage this money so that it doesn't run out? And BlackRock and I think the Center on Retirement Research have both come out with pieces recently on this. What they're seeing is a lot of seniors just aren't spending down. They're afraid that spending down too quickly. So without good advice here, if you're not really great with finances, I think we see a lot of people who are afraid. I think the second piece, the Center on Retirement Research piece, noted people with pensions are less likely to spend down. They don't need to. But it's a hard thing for people to get right. The fees can be much higher when you leave that fiduciary protection behind in your workplace plan. You see the same thing. Yes.
I think we're hitting the top of our time.
Oh, okay. Okay. So should we allow time for questions? I'll just leave the text up here.
Perfect.
Okay. I apologize.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Vanessa. Vanessa, you're on mute.
All
There you
right. Well, thank you both so much for those informative presentations and for being with us today. I would like to encourage anyone who has a question to go ahead and drop it in the chat. Unfortunately, we're out of time for questions. However, if you do have questions, I'm happy to help direct those to Bridget and Dan so that they can get you answers offline. But I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists today. Bridget Early, Executive Director at the National Public Pension Coalition, and Dan Doonan, Executive Director at the National Institute on Retirement Security. And in the coming days, this session recording will be posted on the Virtual Innovation Classroom registration page. To help you find it, as well as the links to view the other Innovation Classroom recordings from this month's earlier sessions, please see the link in the chat. And CSG will host another round of Innovation Classrooms just like this in person at the CSG National Conference this year, which will be held December 7th through the 10th in Honolulu, Hawaii. So we hope you'll make plans to be there. And thank you all for tuning in.